deep in the woods, where shadows stretch endlessly and silence feels alive, the forest hides secrets far darker than any nightmare you have ever dared to imagine. Picture this: a clearing littered with hundreds of bodies, children forced to drink poison at gunpoint, their final cries echoing through the jungle. Imagine stumbling across a cabin in the wilderness, perfectly built, fully stocked, only to return days later and find it completely gone, as if it had never existed. Picture yourself bending down to inspect a camera on the forest floor, unaware that it's wired to explode the moment you touch it. And think about a hunter pushing aside leaves to reveal a metal barrel inside, the chopped remains of an entire family. These are not stories made to scare you. These are real. The woods are not just home to wildlife and peaceful silence. They are graveyards of horror, crime scenes soaked in blood, and the final resting place of countless forgotten souls. Welcome to The Price Paid. If you dare to look deeper into the abyss, subscribe now, because the darkest truths are about to be revealed. In the dense rainforest of northern Guyana, hidden beneath towering trees and layers of thick vegetation, lies the shadow of one of the darkest chapters in American history. What began as a promise of paradise ended in screams, poison, and nearly 1,000 lifeless bodies. This place would come to be known as Jonestown, a name forever etched into the annals of horror. The story began with Jim Jones, a charismatic preacher who rose to prominence in the United States during the 1960s. He built his following through fiery sermons that blended religious devotion with radical politics. His congregation, known as the People's Temple, believed in equality, communal living, and a utopian dream. But behind Jones's carefully crafted image was a man consumed by power and paranoia. His critics accused him of manipulation, abuse, and megalomania. When the press and government turned their eyes toward him, Jones decided he needed to escape scrutiny. In 1974, he led hundreds of his most loyal followers to Guyana, where he carved out a patch of dense forest and called it Jonestown. To the outside world, it was advertised as a self-sustaining paradise. Propaganda videos showed smiling families, fresh produce, and happy children eating snacks in the tropical sun. Jones himself boasted about the community's achievements, their gardens, their livestock, even their ability to produce leafy vegetables praised by the local government. To his followers, this seemed like the promised land, but beneath the surface, paradise was rotting. Life in Jonestown was nothing like the dream that had been sold. Days began early and ended late, with members working 12-hour shifts 6 days a week. The humid jungle air was oppressive, the soil unforgiving, and food often scarce. Escape was almost impossible. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter, and Jones had secured agreements with Guyanese officials that made returning to the United States a bureaucratic nightmare. Families who regretted joining found themselves trapped in a jungle prison. As conditions deteriorated, relatives back in the U.S. began to worry. Survivors later recalled how letters from home were censored, phone calls were monitored, and anyone expressing doubts about Jones faced humiliation and punishment. Reports filtered back to America that the so-called paradise was closer to a labor camp. Eventually, these cries for help reached Congressman Leo Ryan. Determined to uncover the truth, Ryan assembled a delegation of journalists and concerned family members. In November of 1978, he and his group traveled deep into the Guyanese jungle, walking directly into history's most infamous nightmare. At first, Jonestown seemed exactly as Jones had advertised. The delegation was greeted warmly, shown thriving gardens, and introduced to smiling residents. But much of it was an illusion. Jones had staged rehearsals, preparing his followers to tell outsiders they were happy. Even so, cracks quickly appeared. During the visit, 2 members of the cult secretly slipped a note to Ryan's team. It was simple but chilling. "Please help us get out of Jonestown." By the next morning, several more residents begged to leave, including some of Jones's own inner circle. This was the beginning of the end. Jones, already paranoid that the US government was plotting against him, viewed the departures as a betrayal and a threat. As Ryan's delegation prepared to leave with the defectors, armed guards ambushed them at a nearby airstrip. Shots rang out. Congressman Leo Ryan, along with 3 others, were gunned down in cold blood. Several more were wounded. Back in Jonestown, chaos descended. Jones gathered his followers at the central pavilion and told them that the time had come. In his words, this was a revolutionary act, their only way to escape oppression. Large tubs of grape-flavored drink laced with cyanide were brought out. Parents gave the poison to their children, sometimes willingly, sometimes forced at gunpoint. Survivors recalled the sound of crying, screaming, and the silence that followed. Some who resisted were injected with poison or shot outright. By the time Guyanese officials and U.S. military forces reached Jonestown, it was too late. Nearly 900 people lay dead, sprawled across the grass in neat rows, as though they had been prepared for a mass funeral. The scene was indescribable. Mothers clutching infants, families collapsed together, the jungle echoing with a silence heavier than death itself. The Jonestown Massacre was, at that time, the largest deliberate loss of American civilian life in history. The images shocked the world, hundreds of bodies rotting in the heat of the rainforest, a grotesque testament to the dangers of blind devotion. And yet, the horror was not only in the numbers but in the way it unfolded. These people had not simply chosen death. Many had been coerced, manipulated, or forced into it. Even in their final moments, Jim Jones controlled them. In the decades since, Jonestown has become a grim symbol of cult psychology and the devastating power of unchecked authority. The phrase "drinking the Kool-Aid" entered popular culture, trivializing what was in reality a massacre of immense proportions. Survivors and families of the dead continue to speak about the tragedy, reminding the world that these were not faceless victims, but mothers, fathers, and children who wanted a better life. The jungle has long since reclaimed Jonestown. Vines creep over the ruins, wildlife roams freely, and the air is thick with the humid weight of silence. But for those who know the story, the forest still whispers. It whispers of promises turned to poison, of a man who played God, and of hundreds who paid the ultimate price. Jonestown was not just a cult, not just a mass suicide. It was a massacre hidden in the depths of a rainforest. A reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are not lurking in the shadows of the woods, but standing proudly in the light, calling themselves saviors. And for those who followed him, the cost of belief was death. Forests have always carried an aura of mystery. Their dense canopies swallow sound, their twisted roots hide secrets, and their isolated landscapes provide cover for horrors unseen. Among the countless trees and trails, some of the most unsettling human tragedies have been discovered. Two stories in particular, Roan, from the heart of rural Germany in the early 20th century. The other from modern-day California reveal just how strange and terrifying the woods can truly be. The first tale begins in Bavaria, Germany, in 1922. The Gruber family lived on an isolated farmstead known as Hinterkaifeck, bordered by fields and a forest. It was a lonely place, with neighbors living half a kilometer away. For years, strange happenings unsettled the household. Their maid had quit, insisting the house was haunted after hearing footsteps in the attic. Family members reported seeing strange figures at the edge of the woods. Watching the property at night, doors would be found unlocked, and mysterious footprints appeared in the snow, leading toward the farmhouse but never away from it. On April 4th, 1922, a mechanic named Albert Hoffner arrived at the farm to repair a machine. The animals in the barn made a great deal of noise, but the house was eerily silent. Hoffner finished his work, but when no one came to greet him, he left uneasy. Later that day, neighbors decided to investigate. Breaking into the barn, they stumbled upon a nightmare. Beneath piles of hay lay the bludgeoned bodies of Andreas Gruber, his wife Casilia, their daughter Victoria, and Victoria's young child. The maid, Maria, and another child were discovered inside the house, all brutally murdered. Investigators determined the murders had been carried out days earlier. What made the case chilling was the behavior of the killer afterward. Whoever committed the crime had stayed in the house, caring for the livestock, eating meals, and moving about as though they lived there. Windows were covered, and efforts were made to conceal the bodies. Yet, despite the horror of the scene and the disturbing clues, no suspect was ever identified. Motives where unclear valuables remained untouched, eliminating robbery as the sole explanation. Over a century later, the Hinterkaifeck murders remain unsolved, a chilling reminder of how violence can erupt even in the most isolated corners of civilization. Now, leap forward nearly 100 years to Arcata, California, where the forests are just as deep, but the story is no less haunting. In 2015, Mark Andre, the director of environmental services for the town, was marking trees in the Arcata Community Forest when he stumbled upon something strange. At first glance, it looked like an abandoned shack hidden among the vegetation. But on closer inspection, it was much more than that. The cabin was solidly built, resting on a foundation of cinder blocks, with walls made from carefully cut wood and plastic sheeting to keep out the rain. It had a locking door, and inside, park rangers later discovered a tidy living space complete with a stove, canned food, water, and even books neatly stacked on shelves. Whoever had lived there had taken great care to create not a temporary shelter, but a true home in the wilderness. For days, rangers watched from a distance, waiting for the mysterious occupant to return. No one ever did. Eventually, they broke the lock and inspected the cabin more thoroughly, but nothing inside revealed the identity of the builder. The cabin seemed like the secret lair of a ghost. Following protocol, they left an eviction notice on the door. When they returned weeks later to dismantle the structure, they were shocked to find that the entire cabin had vanished. Every piece of wood, every stone, even the nails gone. In its place, the only sign left behind was a strange charcoal symbol, the international mark for squatters. This disappearance raises more questions than answers. How had someone managed to construct such a sturdy shelter in secrecy? How did they dismantle and remove it so quickly without anyone noticing? Was the cabin built by a hermit, a survivalist, or someone hiding from the law? The case remains unsolved, and the Arcata Forest still whispers its mystery. For hikers wandering those trails, the thought lingers. Somewhere, someone once built a secret life in those woods. And if they could do it once, could they be out there still, hiding in the trees, watching in silence? Both the Gruber murders and the vanishing cabin highlight the strange intersection of forests and human darkness. In one case, the woods shielded a massacre, and in another, they hid an anonymous architect of solitude. The forest is both a witness and an accomplice. It muffles the screams of victims, swallows the footprints of killers, and offers cover to those who wish to disappear. And yet, these stories also serve as reminders of how fragile the boundary is between civilization and wilderness. One moment, a farmhouse represents safety and family. The next, it becomes a tomb. One moment, a cabin seems like a harmless refuge. The next, it evaporates into a mystery with sinister undertones. When people speak of being afraid in the forest, they often think of wild animals, or perhaps of getting lost among endless trees. But the real terror often comes not from nature itself, but from humanity's darkest impulses lurking within it. And as these cases show, sometimes the forest doesn't just conceal horror, it keeps it alive, unanswered, unsolved, and unforgettable. Forests are supposed to be places of peace, where hikers find solitude and hunters track their prey. But what happens when the wilderness itself becomes a stage for carefully constructed traps and grotesque hiding places? Some of the most horrifying discoveries in wooded areas are not accidents of nature, but deliberate acts of cruelty. Two stories, the case of explosive trail cameras in Kentucky and the Bear Brook murders in New Hampshire, prove that some terrors are man-made, hidden in plain sight among the trees. In May of 2016, a hiker in Harlan, Kentucky, stumbled across a trail camera lying abandoned in the dirt. At first, it seemed like nothing unusual. Trail cameras are often strapped to trees, quietly recording wildlife in the forest. But this one was oddly Boreno battery, no storage. The hiker carried it home and passed it to a friend who enjoyed tinkering with electronics. That friend inserted a new battery, expecting to see photos of deer or raccoons. Instead, the camera exploded. The blast ripped through the man's hand, tearing off fingers and sending shrapnel into his stomach. Emergency responders rushed him to the hospital, where he barely survived. When police began investigating, they quickly realized this was no accident. Someone had deliberately modified the device to detonate the moment it received power. Authorities swept the forest and found another camera rigged in the same way. Soon, suspicions turned toward a local man named Mark Sawaf. Neighbors reported hearing strange explosions from his property months earlier. When police raided his home, they found buckets filled with bomb-making materials, tools, and a disturbing handwritten note. Broken camera for a broken soul. Sawaf was arrested, but before he could face trial, tragedy struck again. While leading officers to more of his hidden devices, he attempted to grab an officer's gun. In the struggle, he was fatally shot. Before his death, Sawaf admitted to planting at least a dozen explosive cameras across the forest. Some were found, but investigators remain uncertain if all of them were recovered. Even today, hikers in Harlan County wonder if another deadly trap still lies hidden, waiting for someone curious enough to pick it up. The story of explosive cameras turns the ordinary into something lethal. What appears to be harmless equipment can become a weapon in the wrong hands. It's a chilling reminder that the dangers in the woods are not always natural, Sometimes the trees hide the work of a twisted mind. If that tale represents the hidden dangers of curiosity, the Bear Brook murders show the horror of deliberate concealment. In November 1985, a hunter wandering through Bear Brook State Park in Allenstown, New Hampshire, noticed something strange among the leaves. Buried beneath debris was a rusted 55-gallon metal drum. Inside, he made a discovery that would haunt investigators for decades: the dismembered remains of a woman and a young girl. The victims had been bludgeoned to death and cut into pieces before being stuffed into the barrel. But the brutality did not end there. In 2000, another barrel was discovered just 150 yards away, containing the remains of 2 more young girls, both between 1 and 4 years old. 4 victims in total, all killed in the same way. Whoever the killer was, they had chosen the forest as their dumping ground, believing the wilderness would keep their crimes hidden forever. For years, investigators were stymied. The victims were too disfigured to identify, and no missing persons matched their descriptions. The case grew cold, and the barrels became a symbol of one of the state's darkest mysteries. It wasn't until the rise of advanced DNA testing that answers began to emerge. Scientists traced 3 of the victims to a woman named Marlies Honeychurch and her 2 daughters, Marie Vaughn and Sarah McWaters. The adult woman, along with her children, had vanished years earlier. But who had killed them? Eventually, suspicion fell upon a man named Terry Rasmussen, also known by several aliases. Rasmussen was a career criminal and drifter who manipulated women and children into his orbit, only to harm them. By the time DNA evidence linked him to the Bear Brook murders, Rasmussen was already dead, serving a prison sentence for the murder of another woman. While investigators are confident he was responsible, many questions remain unanswered. Who was the 4th victim, still unidentified? Why were the killings carried out in such a brutal, methodical fashion? The Bear Brook case not only horrified the public, but also reshaped criminal investigations. It became one of the earliest examples of forensic genealogy being used to solve a cold case, inspiring countless other breakthroughs across the country. But even with the science, the case leaves behind a chill. The image of those rusted barrels, hidden in the shadows of the forest, remains a haunting reminder of what human beings are capable of when cruelty festers unchecked. Together, the explosive cameras in the Bear Brook barrels tell a story about how easily the ordinary can be transformed into horror. A camera meant to capture wildlife becomes a deadly weapon. A metal drum normally used for storage becomes a coffin, and the forest, vast and silent, becomes an accomplice. For anyone wandering into the woods, these stories force a question. How much do you trust the ground beneath your feet, the objects you see abandoned along the trail, or the stillness of the trees? The forest may look peaceful, but peace can be a mask. Beneath it, danger waits. And sometimes, that danger takes the form of the unimaginable to calculated cruelty of those who walk among us. Forests are more than silent sanctuaries of nature. They can be hiding places for crimes so gruesome that even investigators are left shaken for years. Some woods conceal pits filled with human remains. Others yield fragments of bodies designed to erase a person's very identity. These haunting cases, from the Red Elm Woods in Washington to the lonely English countryside where the infamous bony torso was found, remind us how the forest swallows secrets and keeps them alive long after the killers are gone. The story of Red Elm Woods begins innocently enough, with a man walking his dog near Ashford, Washington. The forest was remote, its trails overgrown and almost untouched, and cell service in the area was non-existent. About 2 miles in, the dog suddenly grew restless, growling at a patch of thick underbrush. The owner thought perhaps it was a dead animal. A foul smell hung in the air, the stench of rot. But what he uncovered was far more sinister. In a shallow pit no more than 5 feet across were 6 bundles wrapped tightly in black plastic sheeting and sealed with duct tape. Heavy river stones had been placed on top, as if to keep the packages hidden and immovable. One of the bundles had torn open, revealing a human hand. The man recoiled in horror and alerted authorities immediately. The following day, forensic teams arrived. What they uncovered was grotesque. The bundles contained partial human remains, dismembered and sealed in plastic. At least 4 different victims were identified, though the exact number was difficult to confirm. Some had been bludgeoned, others strangled, and one bore signs of having been partially burned. The state of decomposition suggested that the pit had been used over several years, with new bodies added at different times. Investigators pieced together some of the victims' identities. One was linked to a missing person report from 2003. Another had never even been reported missing, an anonymous soul whose life ended in silence. But the deeper questions: who was responsible? and why remained unanswered. No fingerprints, no DNA of a suspect, no witnesses. Whoever buried these people had managed to vanish as completely as the victims themselves. The Red Elm Woods pit remains unsolved, a chilling monument to the forest's ability to harbor monsters unseen. If the Red Elm pit illustrates the scale of cruelty, the Bolney torso case demonstrates precision and calculation. In October 1991, along a rural lane near Bolney, England, a passerby noticed something unusual. Hidden beneath brush and wrapped tightly in an old carpet was a human torso. The head was missing, as were both hands, and the arms had been cut cleanly below the elbows. The mutilation was deliberate, designed to strip the body of identifying features such as tattoos or fingerprints. Forensic analysis suggested the victim was a physically fit man, between 30 and 45 years old, likely of southern German origin, yet no missing persons report in the United Kingdom matched his description. Operation A23, a task force involving 60 officers and significant resources, was launched. Investigators searched abandoned buildings, interviewed residents, and scoured the countryside for clues. One discovery stood out: an abandoned rental home, once occupied by a man using a German alias. Inside, police found an adult magazine with strange numbers written inside, but the connection to the torso was tenuous, and no suspect was ever brought to justice. Over 3 decades later, the victim remains unidentified, known only as the Bolney torso. The case reveals a terrifying reality. Someone with skill and knowledge had taken time to dismember the body with precision, ensuring the victim could never be identified. It wasn't simply murder, it was erasure. The fact that such a calculated act could remain unsolved for so long only deepens the horror. When considered together, the Red Elm Woods pit and the Bolney torso case illustrate 2 extremes of the same nightmare. One represents the dumping ground of repeated violence, bodies piled over years in a shallow grave. The other reflects the cold efficiency of a single murder meant to wipe away identity. Both rely on the forest as an accomplice its silence, its remoteness, its ability to keep secrets. For investigators, these crimes are not only tragedies, but also reminders of the limits of human knowledge. Advances in DNA technology have solved many cold cases in recent decades, giving names back to the nameless and justice to the dead. Yet, some mysteries resist resolution. In the absence of answers, what remains are fragments of horror. A bundle of bones and plastic, a torso with missing limbs, and the haunting realization that someone walked away, unseen. For the average person, these stories fuel the imagination in dreadful ways. Imagine walking your dog and stumbling across a pit of bodies, or hiking through the English countryside and realizing you're standing where someone once dumped a mutilated corpse. The thought lingers that behind every tree could be a secret grave, and that sometimes what is buried in the forest never truly stays hidden. The woods have always held an uneasy place in folklore and storytelling. They are depicted as magical, dangerous, untamed. But as these cases show, their true terror lies not in myths or fairy tales, but in human cruelty. Red Elm Woods and Bolney are not tales from ghost stories. They are real, and they remind us that some of the darkest corners of human behavior are best hidden where few dare to tread. The woods are supposed to be a sanctuary, a place where people go to find peace, solitude, or even freedom from the chaos of society. Yet time and again, they have revealed themselves as stages for nightmares that defy imagination. From the mass suicide of Jonestown to the silent slaughter of the Gruber family, from explosive traps hidden in Kentucky forests to the rusted barrels of Bear Brook, from shallow graves in Washington to the mutilated remains in Bolney, these stories share one chilling truth: the forest keeps secrets, and often those secrets are drenched in blood. Each case carries its own horror. Jonestown reminds us of the terrifying power of blind devotion, how hundreds of lives can be destroyed by a single man's delusion. The Gruber murders show that violence can erupt even in the most isolated places, leaving behind questions that may never be answered. The Vanishing Cabin is a ghost story grounded in reality, proof that people can disappear into the trees as easily as shadows. The explosive trail cameras reveal a cruelty so twisted that it weaponizes curiosity itself. Bear Brook exposes not only brutality but also the resilience of science, showing how DNA technology can reach across decades to uncover truths. And the Red Elm Woods pit and Bolney torso prove that sometimes the darkest crimes are the ones without resolution, leaving us haunted by absence as much as by presence. What ties these stories together is not just horror, but vulnerability. The forest, vast and indifferent, offers cover for anyone who wishes to vanish or to commit acts of cruelty. It muffles cries, hides graves, and keeps its silence. And yet, it is also where the truth eventually emerges, through hunters, hikers, neighbors, or chance discoveries that drag buried nightmares back into the light. For those who venture into the woods, these stories are a reminder. Danger is not always the growl of a bear or the snap of a branch in the dark. Sometimes, the true predators are human. Sometimes, the most haunting discoveries are the ones made not by accident, but by design. But perhaps the deepest lesson is that the forest reflects the human soul. It can be a place of peace, of survival, even of rebirth. Or it can be the perfect backdrop for horror, where cruelty thrives and victims are left to be forgotten. The woods themselves are neutral. It is what we bring in to theme our hopes, our fears, our violence, that determines whether they become sanctuaries or graveyards. As long as forests stretch across the world, they will continue to hold both beauty and terror. And for those who dare to explore them, the question always remains: what lies just beyond the trees? Welcome to The Price Paid. If these stories gripped you, unsettled you, or made you think twice about what the woods conceal, subscribe now, because there are darker truths still waiting, hidden in the shadows, and we will be here to reveal them.